Hari Om. In the last discourse, the Lord gave a detailed description of meditation. In fact, He gave very specific details about the place where we should sit, the kind of place that we should select, how to do, what's the attitude to take, the kind of seat that we need to have, how to sit and how to maintain a certain posture. All these details were given. The Lord also then after that has stated that we have to practice moderation in eating, sleeping, recreation, and all our activities. Everything has to be in moderation. Even the effort that we put in, whether it's a good action or not, the effort that we put in has to be regulated and in moderation. I gave the example last time where if somebody wants to jog 3 miles every day, if you start off doing full speed from the very beginning, within about 10 minutes you would get tired and you would just collapse out there. So in moderation, if you do it slowly and gradually increase your activities, you would be able to do the 3 miles every single day without any difficulty. That's the kind of moderation that the Lord is recommending. Even in meditation, He recommends that there should be no exertion, no long meditations. And then the Lord assures that by this yoga, all your miseries will be destroyed. Now, Arjuna, as a skeptic, would not accept such blind faith statements when he says all your miseries will be destroyed. So the Lord gives explanations thereafter. On the seat of the meditation, fix your mind on the Supreme. This is one of the things that He recommends. While seated on the meditation, after giving all the details as to how to sit and so on, what are we supposed to do after we sit on the meditation seat? The Lord says, fix your mind on the Supreme, on the Lord, Brahman. But how do we do that? We know that our mind keeps running in all different directions. So how do we focus? How do we fix our mind on the Supreme? Now, it is easy for realized masters and the rishis to sit in meditation and immediately focus their mind on Brahman. But on an average person like you and me, we need some guidance, some specific ideas. And this is one of the ways by which we know that a guru is important. Just by reading the scriptures or listening to scriptural talks alone is not enough. We need a guru to direct us. Our Gurudev, out of his compassion, had given us specific ideas. And that's one of the things that we practiced during meditation last time. He said, after sitting on your meditation seat, close your eyes and focus on your body. Maintain absolute stillness. Achal. There should be no movement at all. And be conscious of the fact that there is no movement. Now the logic behind that is when our mind is focusing on the body and becoming conscious of the fact that there is no movement in the body, the mind is now getting single point. The single pointedness is of course on the body, but nonetheless, instead of the mind going in 10 different directions, it is now only in one direction, which is on the body. And then we shift our attention to our mind after focusing on the body, and we realize that the mind has calmed down considerably because of this single pointedness. But then, the moment you become conscious of your mind, thoughts come rushing in again, and then you shift your mind back to your body again. Now we are supposed to be doing back and forth, shifting our attention back from the body to the mind and so on. Now, obviously, this back and forth cannot go on indefinitely. So therefore, in order to reduce the amount of thoughts that keep rushing in, exercises are recommended over a period of time. And what are those period of time? What are those exercises? Freeing your mind of longing for desires. That's what the scriptures recommend. You free your mind not of desires, but for longing for desires. Now here, the Lord describes very carefully, listen to this. It is a misunderstanding that all the scriptures say is renounce all desires. As long as we are alive, this mind will have desires. Our Gurudev says, if anyone says that they have no desires, you need to ask them, when do we bury you? Because you will have zero desires only when you are dead. So desires are going to be there. In fact, desires are not exactly a bad thing to have. For example, if one has desires to acquire wealth, that would give him a lot of energy, motivation, incentive and dynamism in his activities because he wants to acquire wealth. So that's a good thing because he would be acquiring wealth and that wealth can be distributed and so on. It is the obsession. Once a person gets obsessed with wealth, that at all cost they want to make money, no matter what, then the mind starts going in all crooked ways to make the money, and it doesn't matter who you cheat or who you plunder, you want to make that money. That's obsession with wealth. So that is longing for desires, where constantly you are thinking about your desires and imagining and fantasizing about desires. That's what this longing for desires mean. So desire per se is not bad, but longing for desires is what is bad. And when we curb those longing for desires, these mad rush of thoughts in our mind also would consequently get less. This is the advice given by the Lord. When it becomes an obsession, the mind gets dissipated. So renouncing the excessive yearning for desired objects is what is recommended. The yogi who is able to focus exclusively on Brahman is called a yuktaha. His mind is compared to the flame of a candle. I described that last time. If there is a candle that is lit and kept at the doorway, there would be cross breeze in the doorway, and with the cross breeze, the flame would be fluttering back and forth. Whereas, if you take the same candle and keep it in the corner of the room, where there is no cross breeze, the candle, the flame will not be fluttering. In fact, the flame would be going upwards. The same way the mind. When the mind is being bombarded by desires, it keeps on fluttering back and forth. The mind will be restless all the time. Whereas when you eliminate desires or cut down on the number of desires, the mind will be automatically going upwards towards Brahman. Now, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, when these things are told to a skeptic like Arjuna, which is what an average intelligent man in today also is like, his question would be, how is it that by doing all these things that I would benefit? What kind of benefit would I get by meditating and putting in all this effort? What for? Anticipating the doubt in the people's mind, the Lord describes in the next 4 verses the benefits of meditation or the advantages of meditating. Number 1, when the mind is quietened, it attains a serene tranquility in which you experience the self not as something separate but as your own true nature. When you practice this meditation, gradually you would notice that your mind gets calmer and calmer, and in that serene, calm, tranquil mind, you would realize the presence of Brahman within you, the Atman, the Self. And when that realization comes, you would also realize it is not that Atman is in there and we are making an effort and then we come to see Atman in there. It is not that the Atman is separate from you. You and I are basically Atman the Self. But we don't realize that that is the divinity that we truly are. But when we practice this tranquility and calmness, we come to realize not as a separate entity, but that Atman the Self is nothing but me and me alone. The self conditioned by the mind is the ego. When the mind is arrested completely, the ego comes to apprehend the self. Now, as we all know, the self, the Atman, when it is conditioned by our mind, is what we call our ego. The self conditioned by our mind is our ego. Now, when the thoughts in our mind gets little by little dissipated and controlled, and eventually when the mind is totally arrested, the ego comes to realize that this body, mind and intellect is not my true self, but it truly comes to apprehend that Atman the Self is my true self. Worldly happiness is gained through sense organs. The intellect perceives it. The bliss gained through meditation is perceived by the pure mind. Now, worldly happiness, you and I know that we gain happiness or joy or pleasures in this world by our contact with objects. Objects are finite. All objects in this world are finite, meaning they are not permanent. They change. So naturally, when these objects disappear or deteriorate or break down, the happiness that we were getting out of those objects also go. Therefore, we come to sorrow. So that is our common experience. Worldly happiness always ends in sorrow. Worldly happiness gained through sense organs, and when we gain those happiness in worldly objects, how do we know that we are happy? The intellect perceives that happiness. So in spirituality, there is no contact with worldly objects, because as recommended earlier, we practice introspection. And when you practice introspection, there is no contact with the outside world. your mind gets calmer and you experience that bliss. The question is, who experiences that bliss? Because when you calm down yourself, and they say when the mind is totally dissipated, that's when you realize the self. If the mind and intellect are not there, then who perceives this bliss? The Lord says, it's your pure intellect that perceives this bliss. Now, what is the pure intellect? In Vedanta, it is said that the pure intellect is intellect that has been purified of the rajas and the tamas. The rajas is the avarana. The rajas in us veils our intellect. When we are agitated and have desires in our mind, it veils our intellect. And with that veiling, the mind gets agitated. So this avarana and that agitation is called vikshepa. This avarana and vikshepa are the two factors that cloud our right thinking. When those are removed, when the avarana and the vikshepa are removed, meaning when the mind and the intellect are transcended, there exists what we call in Vedanta pure intellect. And that pure intellect is the one that perceives the bliss that we get in meditation. Once having reached the state of bliss, one never leaves. The question is, you put in all this effort to meditate, and then let's assume that after a long period of practicing meditation, we actually come to realize and experience that bliss. The question would be, okay, now that I have attained bliss, but then I'm still alive, I have to live in this world, so then I come back to my daily activities again. Next time when I want to feel that bliss again, then do I have to put in all these superhuman efforts again and practice all that? The Lord says no. Once you attain that state of bliss, even to a smaller extent, you never come back to the realization that you are this limited entity who is functioning in this world. You will always remember, you are always consciously aware that you are nothing but that divine Atman in you. The example again is when somebody is acting in a play. In the play, he is acting as a king. In actual fact, he is just a menial laborer in actual life. But on the stage, he is acting as a king. Even when he is acting as a king, he is consciously aware all the time that he is nothing but a laborer. That's the kind of a thing that we are talking about here. Once you attain that bliss state, where you know that you are nothing but Brahman himself, no matter what you are doing thereafter, you are consciously aware all the time that you are nothing but Brahman himself. You realize that this bliss is superior to everything else experienced by you. This bliss that you experience is superior, meaning there is no words to describe it. Because at our level, the experiences that we have cannot compare to this bliss that you would experience. It will withstand any tragedies in life. Because that question was asked, when a realized person functions in this world again, he is also going to meet with tragedies, bereavements, loss of loved ones. Won't that affect that person? The Lord reassures that once you attain this feeling of bliss, It will withstand all tragedies in life. You will be able to withstand everything and not be affected by that. In the material world, joy is perceived by contact with objects. As I mentioned earlier, the joy is finite, and hence the objects are finite. It ends in sorrow. Hence, we have to disconnect from the fields of objects. As long as we are using the mechanism of perception, this disconnect is not possible. Mind cannot exist without attachment. To detach from the pain of the unreal and attach to the bliss of the real is this yoga, and it's called Dukkha Samyoga Viyoga. Now, in the material world, as I mentioned earlier, happiness and joy is obtained through contact with objects. Objects are finite, therefore this joy is also finite, because the objects will disintegrate. Hence, the advice is, do not get attached to these worldly objects, but attach yourself to the infinite, which is the real, not the unreal. And when we do that, it's called the Dukkha Samyoga Viyoga. This yoga is to be practiced, which means the yoga meaning meditation, with an eager and decisive mind. Firm resolve and undespairing mind is the secret of success. When we practice meditation, it is very easy, and it is a common experience that we get discouraged. Because when you sit for meditation, that's when the mind keeps thinking about all the things that you even never thought about when you are awake and functioning out there. Why? Because now you're quiet, you're sitting, and now you're focusing on your mind. It is very easy in that frame of mind to give up and say, this is never going to happen to me. I'm never going to be able to realize. Never despair. The Lord again reassures. Do not despair. Keep on practicing this yoga with a firm and decisive mind, and never despair. The state of mind ideal for meditation is total renunciation of all desire. Even desire for happiness should be renounced. That's the recommendation. Sankalpa Prabhavan Kama. Now that's a famous phrase. Sankalpa Prabhavan Kama. Meaning, now you and I are born with vasanas. It is our vasanas are determined what kind of a body I am going to have, what kind of an environment I am going to be in, and the purpose why I have taken this form in this environment is so that I could exhaust my vasanas. Now, if that is so, I should be exhausting my vasanas, meaning I should be living out my desires. Vasanas exhibit themselves or manifest themselves through my desires. So, I should be exhausting my desires. So, what is wrong if I indulge in my desires? Whatever desires that come to my mind, I want to exhaust them. I want to indulge in them and exhaust them. So that's the question. What are the desires that I should indulge in, and what are the desires that I should renounce? The Lord says, Sankalpa Prabhavan Kama. Renounce all desires that arise out of Sankalpa. Meaning, all desires that you and I are conscious of. They are all 98% of our desires are desires that we are conscious of. Meaning, these are desires that are borrowed from others. My own natural desires, my own natural vasanas, I will not be conscious about. Let's say that I am a musician. Music comes naturally to me, let's say. If I open my mouth and start singing, music just flows out of my mouth. You go to such a musician, he thinks everybody should be able to sing. What's the big deal? Just open your mouth and, just sing. But when you and I start singing the way he is singing, it comes out like a frog croaking. So what is the difference? For him, that is his natural vasana. He is not even conscious about it. Just like a painter. He takes the brush and on the canvas, he'll, in his mind he has a certain idea and he does it. The picture comes out very nicely. That's his natural vasana. He is not even conscious about it. Those are the vasanas that need to be exhausted. You indulge in them. But other vasanas that we have, I want to make money, I want to have a house, I want to have a car. How did I get these desires? By looking at others and observing, I have acquired those desires. 98% of our desires are those. Those are the ones that we are supposed to renounce. Those are the ones that are called Sankalpa Prabhavan Kama, born out of our imagination of the mind. Ordinarily, the mind is able to control the sense organs. So, ordinarily, the mind is not able to control our sense organs. Our sense organs are constantly seeking contact with sense objects. Our mind is not able to control it. But if the mind is strengthened and made powerful, it can control sense organs. How do you make your mind powerful? Powerful enough to control your sense organs. That mind which is made strong by conquest over desires, it can control sense organs. So when desires are eliminated little by little, by conscious thinking and discriminated thoughts, we can eliminate most of the desires. Thinking about the consequences, the price that we pay to get the desire fulfilled, and the fleeting nature of the joy that we get by fulfilling our desires. Consideration of all that and then rejecting those desires, if we can continue to reduce our desires little by little, we are empowering our mind. And the mind that has got empowered in such a way would be strong enough to control sense organs. Thereafter, even if the sense organs contact sense objects, if my eyes contact sense objects that are pleasurable and I don't want to indulge in them, my mind would be able to control it if my mind is strong enough. But if my mind is weak, if I see something tempting, that's what I would want to see. So sense organs in effect are controlling me. But if we make our mind strong, then we would be in control. This strength of mind is achieved in stages. Now, the Lord again wants here, the strength in the mind is not accomplished overnight. Not by thinking, okay, from today on I'm not going to give in to any desires. And tomorrow morning I'm going to be fully in control. Never happens. It has to be done in stages. So little by little we exercise control over our sense pleasures, and by that our mind gets empowered more and more, and then we are able to control the sense organs. It happens in stages called Shanai Shanai, meaning little by little, gradually. By withdrawal from sense pleasures, the mind thus strengthened is then brought under the control of the intellect by constant thought of Brahman. Once the mind is now in control and has controlled the sense organs, then we bring that mind under the control of the intellect. The intellect is even subtler than the mind. Why? Because the intellect would be the one that has the discrimination. And with that, it will tell the mind what are the things that it should give into and what are the things that it should not. So we bring that mind that had been empowered to control sense organs, you bring that mind under the control of the intellect. Once this is accomplished, let him not start any new wave of thoughts. So once we have reached that state where we have empowered our mind and brought that mind under the control of our intellect, let there be no new wave of thoughts, because the mind will again try to go into areas of sense pleasures. Do not start any new wave of thoughts. Thoughts are going to come into our mind anyhow, but do not dwell on it and don't start any new wave of thoughts. When the mind strays, and that happens when we are on the seat of meditation, the mind tends to stray. When the mind strays, immediately bring it back to focus. Do not wait till the mind goes on and acquires more and more momentum out there. When it starts straying, bring it right back and bring it to the focus again. The mind strays, bring it back again immediately. The nature of the mind is restlessness, and that's called chanchala, and unsteadiness, asthira. So do not despair. The Lord again reassures the nature of our mind. That's how we have been created. The nature of our mind is restlessness, chanchala, and unsteadiness, asthira. These two are the qualities of our mind that we have been born with. So you are bringing that under control. We talked about getting a horse tamed so that you can ride the horse. In the same way, the mind is also like that. It is chanchala and asthira at all times. We can tame it and bring it under control. So do not despair just because your mind is restless and unsteady. That is its nature, but you are in the process of bringing it under control. Santa Rajasam and Akalmisham. Santa Rajasam, because when the mind is agitated, it is in a state of Rajas, because when the state of Rajas is the one that causes agitation in your mind. When you control that agitation, it's called Santa Rajasa. You have controlled the Rajasic activities of the mind. And when you do that, when you control that agitation in your mind, the mind calms down and all the negativities, the vasanas, drop off. Akalmisha, meaning all the dirt falls off. Quieting the mind of its agitations, and when the mind is steadily held in this quietude, the vasanas, that's the kalmishan, drops off. Again, the example there is of a helium balloon. If there is a balloon and you let it out there, it goes up naturally. And as it goes up, and when it goes into the rarefied atmosphere, at some point the balloon bursts. And when the balloon bursts, the rubber falls off and falls to the ground, and the air that was inside the balloon merges with the atmosphere out there. In the same way, the balloon falls off, and the balloon space merges with the atmospheric space. Similarly, the meditator's mind ends and Brahman contact happens. So when you meditate, your mind is, metaphorically, it soars up, and eventually it drops off all the dirt and merges with Brahman at that point. Having attained this state, he sees nothing but Brahman everywhere. Now, it had been advised to us also that the self in me is the self everywhere. That everyone is nothing but me in a different form. It has been logically shown in many scriptures so far. But then, how come we are not able to see that? We see everybody as separate. I don't see me as another person in a different form. That's because of the state of mind that you are in. Our Gurudev gives an example. If you see somebody who is very strong, he appears like a normal person. But if you want to assess his strength in his body, you have to go and touch him, or you shake hands with him. He says you shake hands with an American man, he will shake you so hard, and so strong, this man is very strong. Whereas you shake hands with an Indian man, it's a very soft shake. So that's why mostly the Indians don't want to shake hands, they say namaste, because they don't want to be squeezed so hard. So the idea is, the strength of another person's body can be assessed only by my body. I cannot just, with my mind, look at somebody and say, that person must be very strong. I don't know, unless I shake hands with him or I touch his muscles and see. In the same way, the emotions and sentiments in a person's mind can be sensed only by my mind. With my body, I cannot, my sense organs, I cannot look at somebody and say, that person is a very sensitive person. I won't be able to assess that. It's my mind that will be able to assess that. In the same way, my intellect can only assess another person's intellect. If I say that somebody is a genius, how would I know that he is a genius? So if there is a nuclear scientist who is giving a talk, and I go and listen to his talk, I know nothing about nuclear physics. For me, he is talking nonsense. But somebody who knows something about nuclear physics, he would appreciate so much, and he would say, what a genius this man is. How is he able to assess that he is a genius? Because he has some knowledge in his intellect. Same with music. Some great musician comes and plays music. If I don't have that music sense in me, I won't be able to appreciate that music. Whereas somebody who has that music sense would be able to appreciate that music a lot more. So in the same way, when we realize the self in me, that I am nothing but Brahman himself, even to a small extent, when I have realized that, to that extent I would be able to see that it is the same Brahman that's in everyone. That's what the Lord is suggesting. Practice that, and that's one of the benefits of that, that when you realize that Brahman is in you, that you are that nothing but that Brahman, you will see nothing but Brahman everywhere. And when you see yourself everywhere, your attitude towards the whole world would be nothing but love. Examples are galore on that, and I have mentioned that before. When I feel a scratch in my leg, my hand automatically, whether it's busy doing something else, whether I'm thinking of something else, it immediately goes for my leg to scratch that, without being asked. Why? Because that leg and this hand are nothing but me. I pervade everything. So if I am as Brahman, I pervade this whole universe. My needs are the same as anybody else's needs. So I would respond to others just like as if I am responding to my own. To the extent that we experience divinity, to that extent we will perceive Brahman everywhere. Thank you very much, and we'll continue with this next time.
Thank you so much.